Hello guys, and today I'll be making a new Minecraft anti-cheat tier list. My first anti-cheat tier list wasn't that good, and hopefully this anti-cheat tier list is better. Let's get started. So first we have AAC, and that's getting a B tier because it has good movement checks for the most part and decent combat checks, but sometimes it's possible to get false flagged by the movement checks, and like it doesn't have other checks for certain things, like such as inventory move and scaffold, I think. But yeah, it's overall pretty good. But yeah. Next up, we have AGC. I'm gonna give it a C tier because there's like 6 block reach bypass and collide fly. I believe still works. And yeah, so it's getting a C tier. Next up, we have Artemis. Artemis is getting a B tier. It has really good combat checks, but the speed checks, not the speed checks, the movement checks are also good. But I found like a speed bypass a few weeks ago when I was on the test server. So yeah. Next up we have Funcraft anti-cheat. They use old NCP. It's complete garbage. Pretty much everything bypasses, so it's getting an F tier. Next up Guardian, F tier. Next up Gwen. Gwen is also F tier. It's really bad. Fly bypasses, long jump bypasses, pretty much everything bypasses. Next up we have Hive. Hive, when it was open, was garbage. Their anti-cheat AAC 3.2.2 and Bedrock is even worse. Next up we have Horizon. Last time I tested it, it wasn't that bad, but I'm not sure if it's any better or if it's still the same, so I'm just gonna give it a C tier. Next up we have Intave. Intave is getting a C tier because it's not as good as it claims. Next up we have Kari. Like when you first go into Kari test server, you would think it's a pretty decent anti-cheat, but then when you start canceling transactions, you would think it, then you would know it's a bad anti-cheat, so it's getting an F tier. Next up, we have Matrix. Matrix is overall a decent anti-cheat because it has it blocks like a lot of speeds and flies, but sometimes it's possible to bypass them. Same with combat, so it's getting a C tier. Next up, we have MC Central, F tier, complete garbage. Next up, we have NCP. I'm gonna give it a C tier. It has good movement checks for the most part, but like the speed checks, the speed can be up to 15 or 20% faster. There's a step, a 2 block step, I believe, and Jesus, which still works. And the combat checks are pretty bad overall. Next up, we have Overflow. Overflow is discontinued, and well, it's pretty good for the most part, but then you have the timer, the disabler that relies on timer, so unfortunately, it's gonna get an F tier. Next up, we have Sentinel. Sentinel, I'm gonna give it a D tier. At first I thought Funky's NCP skid was good, but then I eventually found like quite a bit of bypasses, so it's getting a D tier, and the Bedrock anti-cheat is really bad. So yeah, getting a D tier. So next up, Spartan. Spartan is also getting a D tier. As mediocre combat and movement checks, and the performance is pretty bad, and it's also a meme. So yeah, it's getting a B tier. Next up, we have Varus. Varus is an F tier for obvious reasons. And finally, we have Watchdog. It's pretty hard to give it a C or D tier, like, because there's like I don't believe there's any fly bypasses right now, but at the same time, legits are getting flagged back, and the server has performance issues. So I'm gonna have to go with D tier to be honest. So yeah. So I hope you liked my anti-cheat tier list video, and please subscribe. Until next time, peace out.